Thanks, guys. If you have a Bible, go ahead and open it to the book of Genesis. That's where we're at again this morning. And if that makes you nervous, you're like, man, we've been doing these encounters, and now we're in Genesis for the last, 4 weeks. Are we in trouble? We're not covering every time someone has an encounter with God, just some of the big ones. But hey, a couple things before I get kicked off. First and foremost, if you are listening to me but not in the room, that means that you got you're able to clue in, and you've been listening over the last few weeks and know that we have ceased our video live stream. I want to say a special thank you to everyone who made that possible over the last year. I know I can't remember who was the beginning of that team. I know our deacons were involved. Everett Clemmer kind of headed it up here towards the end and kind of put a team together of people who just served, did a lot of work, frankly, a lot of work to be a blessing to those who felt more comfortable at home. And so I just thank you guys for doing that, and just know that your work in the Lord is not in vain. But it's good to be back at this portion now. A couple other things that I did want to just kind of swing back around on. One is parents of young kids. So today, no Holy Cross kids. And I know that's like, no Holy Cross kids. But just a few weeks, we're moving to like the twice a month thing now. So things are picking up. We're getting our volunteers back in. You've gotten all those emails from Kent, hopefully. And so I just wanted to just kind of remind you of that. Hang in there. It's coming. It's coming. And yeah, I'm thankful for our volunteers that are coming in. All right, so encounters with God. We've been spending the last 4 weeks, we're going to be spending the summer dealing with what is it, how does it, what happens when we have an encounter with God? Because I think all of us to some degree want that, maybe. Many of us need that. And that's part of why we exist as a church, is to help people do that. And so we thought it would be a good idea to look at this. And it sounds like in most of those occurrences, you think, these are all like happy, clappy, fun times, right? What we're going to see this morning, and what we're looking at this morning, is what happens when God encounters you as an opponent. Because it happens. So if you have your place, we're in Genesis 32. The text will be behind me, or it's in your bulletin if you grabbed one of those. If you'd stand in honor of God's word, that's our habit here. I'm going to be reading verses 22 through to 32. Yep, 22 to 32. This is God's word for us. The same night he arose, that's Jacob, he arose, took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. He took them and he sent them across the stream and everything else that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And a man wrestled with him until the breaking of the day. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. And then he said, "Let me go, for the day is broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." And he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." And then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask me my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life has been delivered." The sun rose upon him, and he passed Peniel limping because of his hip. Therefore to this day the people of Israel do not eat the sinew of the thigh that is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip on the sinew of the thigh. This is God's word given for our flourishing. Would you pray with me? Lord, so much conspires against us during this time. There's our distractions, there's our boredom, there's our sin, there's the sin of the guy who's talking. There's so many things that conspire against us hearing from you. But you are God, and so we look to you, and we ask that you would open our hearts to receive what you have for us today, that you would speak. Your servants are listening, and that Jesus, you would let everything that you have done come to the forefront and let everything else fall away. Help us in these moments. Maybe even in times right now when we feel like you are opposing us. to see that everything you do is for our flourishing. Help us to see that. We ask in Christ's name. Amen. Have a seat. Love that. So I was reminded of this the other day, and I don't know why. I think it's actually, I know that there's now a documentary that talks about how these things work, but for some reason, have you ever noticed like things just jump onto maybe you're not on YouTube and you're more godly than me, but you get on YouTube and like something jumps in there and you're like, why is that there? Ooh, but I want to watch it. And then you watch it. And it was a clip of the original Rocky movie. Rocky was a great movie. If you guys haven't seen Rocky, like Rocky was a great movie, but the problem is it made a lot of money. And then there were all these sequels, right? And any sequel that has Hulk Hogan in it is probably not worth watching. But then there was, so Rockies 2 and 3, not so good. Rocky 4, a great piece of Cold War propaganda. I love it. Thought it was awesome. But then, poor Stallone couldn't let it go, so you had Rocky 5, and then they had a 6th movie. But now he's like 96 years old, so they got to move on, right? Like it's only so long before you're not believable anymore. But now what they did is they figured out what we'll do is we'll go with a guy, the next generation, but not his son. We'll go with Apollo Creed's son from the first movie. And then my favorite scene in that movie, the Creed movies, is where Rocky's sitting with Donnie, and he's sitting with him in front of. He pulls him he's training him. He pulls him in front of a mirror, and he says, "You see that guy in the mirror?" I can't do it. I can't do Stallone, so I'm not even going to try. He says, "You see that guy in the mirror, like." The toughest opponent you will ever face is the one staring back at you in the mirror. Sounds awesome in a movie, right? Especially in a boxing movie. I don't think we believe that. I think at the end of the day, most of us really believe that everything else is conspiring against us and not us. Right? That if anything, we believe that we're the ones who want the best for us and want the most, the biggest good for us. We're always for us, right? But here's what this encounter with God is going to tell us this morning, what we're going to see this morning. Is simply this: the biggest enemy of change in your life is you. It's not your boss, it's not your spouse, it's not your kids, it's not your pets, it's you. So as always, there's an outline. If you grabbed a bulletin, you can take some notes. If not, don't worry about it. It just helps you know where we're at. So let's jump into this, okay? We're gonna look at this as a story because it's a story. It's a true story, but it's still a story. So we're gonna look at the setting. We're gonna look at some of the characters, and we're gonna see how we can tell it today. So when I say this is a story, I need us to understand something. All of the stories in the Bible are A, true, but B, written purposefully, okay? And so what I mean by that is that every story, any story, the stories you tell when you get home from work have certain details in them that you think are important, that you want to get across, and other things you leave out because, who cares what kind of soap you washed your hands with in the bathroom this morning? Like, no one cares, right? That's not part of the story. But when we read stories in the Bible, we need to note that there are a couple of things that, as we're reading them, that need to impress themselves upon us. The first and foremost, that story matters. I say that's like, well, duh, Rick, it's in the Bible. But listen to me. There are lots of possible things that God could have talked about in Jacob's life, right? I mean, Jacob, for all intents and purposes, like he lived a long time. There are a lot of things that he could have talked about, but there are certain things that the Bible does talk about, and that means that those things are there for a reason. They're important. There is something about this story that is meant to communicate something to us on two different levels, okay? An explicit level and an implicit one, okay? All right, let me back up. Here's what that means. We are Westerners, right? Westerners like explicit teaching. In other words, like, Rick, tell me what I'm supposed to believe, right? We like things laid out. We like things very clear. But stories communicate, and they do communicate that way. Sometimes it's very clear. Sometimes it's like, and the moral of the story is don't do this, right? Like we get those. The Bible oftentimes, though, doesn't give you that kind of explicit, like, in a story, like, and therefore, don't stop at the Jabbok because some dude is going to run up on you and wrestle with you all night. Like, it doesn't say that. Stories oftentimes will teach us in implicit ways. Okay? Well, now that makes us a little uncomfortable. We'll get to that a little more as we walk through this. So the first thing, this story matters. The second thing, and this hints at the implicit thing, the details matter. Okay? The details matter. That is to say, when details are mentioned in ancient literature, it's not like they're mentioned in novels today, right? Novels today, you read details, and the point is to paint a picture in your head, right? Because no one really cares what color the character's shirt is, except that it makes an image in your head. It's meant to flesh out your imagination. In the ancient world, they didn't care about your imagination. The details were added because there was a purpose to the details. Okay? And so that is a very important thing as we continue here. Now, as we get into, as with all of these, we're jumping in the middle of stories. So if you're not familiar with the Jacob story, let me kind of fill you in. So Jacob is a twin. He had a brother. He's the younger of the two twins. He and his brother were not really sure about their relationship. All we know is that Jake kind of hustles his brother. His brother gets angry. Jacob runs away. He ends up with his uncle Laban. Laban and Jacob get into like a cheating contest to see who can cheat each other the most. And he finally ticks Laban off so much he's got to run away from Laban. And now he is here returning to the land that he grew up in, the land that in fact was promised to him. Now here's the thing about Jacob. Jacob is the child of the promise. We'll get to what that means here in a second. But he is at best, an ambiguous character. This is not the guy, and I know our children's Bibles don't do justice in this. This is not the guy that you want to read stories to your children and say, go be like Jacob. Because what that's going to mean is basically they're going to swindle their boss. They're going to get so plastered their wedding night, they're not going to know who they're sleeping with. And then, eventually they're going to lie, cheat, and steal their way to the top. That's Jacob. This particular story about Jacob is what I would describe as a hinge point in his narrative. It's a hinge point. It's a point at which everything changes. And it happens, as we're getting into setting, it happens at a very interesting time. Okay? I don't know if you noticed that. So he sends all of his family and all of his stuff across the river so that his angry brother sees them first. He's a great guy. Sends them across, and all of a sudden, he gets wrestled with. Look down at verse 24. And Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until the breaking of day. So this wrestling, it happens through the night, but what we're about to see, the point of the story, the dialogue that happens in the story, happens at half-light, at the breaking of the day, when you're not in day, but it's not really nighttime. It's an important detail, okay? We are at a point at which there is a mixing of light and darkness. Remember that. That's an important thing. Now, let's look at the place. Look down at verse 22. Okay, it happens at the Jabbok, and I know all of you are really familiar with Israelite geography, so I can move on. All right, so it happens Okay, so the Jabbok is in what is known as the Transjordan area. It's on the eastern part of that. Now, I should have put a map up. Here's all that really matters. The Transjordan is called the Transjordan because it is a transitionary place. It's not quite Israel, but it's not quite other places. It's in this weird borderland. You see why this is important? It's the setting, the time is at half-light, where it's not really day, it's not really night, and it's happening at a location that's not really Israel, but it is Israel. There's a mixing going on. The time is in between, the place is in between. So whatever else is being set up here, the details of the story are meant to have us see that something is happening, and what that is happening is this weird transition point between these two different worlds. Jacob is being set in a time and place that makes us think that he, in fact, is potentially in the middle of two realities. Certainly in his time in the middle of two realities, not quite day, it's not quite night, and his geography is in the middle of two realities. We're going to see the rest of this in a second. But this confrontation that he's about to undertake is about a transition between living in two worlds, because Jacob is trying to keep a foot in both. Now, let's talk about the characters. So I've already talked about Jacob a good bit, but if you're not familiar at all with the Bible, you're going to love Jacob because, like I said, he is the least biblical figure ever. He's a liar. He's a manipulator. He's a mama's boy. Not that there's anything wrong with that necessarily. I'm just saying, like, his dad really was into his brother. He's more like his mama, and they manipulate dad. Like, it's this crazy story. But he comes from an interesting family. He is the grandson of Abraham, right? And we talked about Abraham last week. Abraham is the guy that God rescues and says, I'm going to do the work of rescuing the world through your family. And then Abraham has 2 boys. One's named Ishmael. God's like, that's not the guy, man. You weren't listening. That's not the guy. And then he has another one named Isaac. And then Isaac has 2 babies, has them at the same time. Well, he doesn't. His wife does. It's Esau and Jacob. And God says that this promise is going to come through Jacob, the younger one. Again, weird in the ancient world. We don't have time to go into that. Okay? We know that he snookered his brother out of his birthright, got him. Esau came in so hungry from hunting, he's like, oh, that soup smells good. He's like, well, I'll give you some soup if you give me the birthright. Okay. So no one ever claimed Esau was smart. So Jacob gets the birthright, has to run away because Esau gets angry. He's like, wait a minute, you were serious? I didn't know you were serious. You were serious. Okay, now you're going to die. And so Jacob runs away. Esau follows him, but doesn't catch him. Okay, here's what else we know about Jacob. Dude's strong as an ox. Okay, in Genesis 29, verse 10, it says that he meets up with Rachel before he knows who she is, and she's at a well, and he takes a stone and he moves it off of the well, like by himself. I don't know if you know, like wells aren't like this. You know what I mean? Like wells are pretty big. Rock was probably pretty big. He just hefted it. Power lifter, big dude. And so you have a guy. Very capable. He's capable physically. He's obviously capable intellectually. He can manipulate. He can lie. He always seems to get what he wants. It may take him a while, but he always gets what he wants. And God, in his wisdom and in his weirdness, has said, this is the guy through whom the promise is going to come. Think about that. So he runs away from home, he snookers his brother, then he schemes his uncle, and now he's running back away from him. And so, like I said, here's a guy who has been able to do everything he wants with his wit, his intellect, and his physical prowess. He has been able to make life work for him. And some of y'all know people, some of you are people like this. Like, you can just make things work. Everyone looks at you and they're like, no matter what bad happens, they always land on their feet. They always figure it out. And some of y'all are mad because you know people like that, because it's not you and you wish it were. But this is who he is. Now, what we don't see a ton of in his life before this event is a relationship with God. As a matter of fact, the only thing that would tell us that he even knows who the dude is that he had one experience. He had that one experience. But God has already claimed him. God met with him. Like I said, that one experience is in chapter 27 if you're interested. But through all of his sketchy dealings, he never turns to the Lord for help. Never seems to even think about him. But now he's got to go home. And he's still scheming. He's trying to figure out how to smooth things over with his brother. That's why I said he sent his entire family. And if you can go back and read a little bit before, he's got this whole way figured out of how he's going to do this. He's going to send one lady and her kids that he had kids with. He's going to send them first with a bunch of stuff. And then they're going to give Esau gifts. And then he's going to send another group, and they're going to give Esau gifts. And then he's going to send everybody else, and they're going to give Esau gifts. And so that by the time they get to Jacob, it's like, well, dude gave me all these presents, and what else am I going to do? But the other possibility is that if Esau's going to be mad about it, Jacob will know long before he ever meets him, right? Now his wives and children will get the bad end of that, but he's making life work. But he sent everything over. In fact, look back at verse 24. This little detail is important. And Jacob was left alone. Here's a time where Jacob has nothing left. All right, so that's Jacob. Now we have this man. Dude comes out of nowhere. Like, Jacob is chilling on the side of the Jabbok, and all we know is that all of a sudden, and then there was a guy, and he wrestled all night long with him. So if you're familiar at all with the story, you assume, as soon as you read it, that it's God, right? I mean, I think that we all just kind of assume that. Well, there's nothing in the story, at least at the beginning of it, that would tell us that. All we know is that he's just some guy. What we are told is that when this guy saw that he wouldn't prevail, he touches Jacob's hip and it goes out of joint. Okay, well that's kind of a superpower, so who can do that? That gives us a little bit of a hint. Yeah, I'm not going to go into that. That's not an important detail. So basically, Jacob intuits that this guy is not normal. And somewhere along the way, he kind of gets this sense like, okay, this is not just a guy. And then he says, and the guy's like, let me go. Jacob's like, I'm not going to let you go until you bless me. Now, here's why that's important. In the ancient world, blessings were always given from the superior person to the inferior person. Okay? And I know we don't like that. We don't like hierarchical stuff. But that's the way it was done. The superior person would bless the inferior person. And so Jacob, though apparently winning, or at least not losing, says, you're not who I thought you were. I'm not going to let go unless you bless me. And then what happens is the guy goes, well, what's your name? Now, again, names in the ancient Near East also very different from names today. I know some of us named our children. They have very, if you got kids, you name them, and maybe well, of course you name them, but you probably have some kind of meaning with the name, right? I'd like to say that was true of many of my children. Sometimes it's just, some of us just pick names based on the way they sound, right? Well, I like that name, I don't like this one. Well, in the ancient world, names were about, they said something about you. As a matter of fact, they directed a course. It was about your character, not just about what sounded good coming off of the tongue. And the name Jacob means deceitful, deceiver. I don't know. So think about that if you named any of your kids Jacob. Like that's what that means. Let's hope it doesn't actually set a course. Okay? But the name Israel means strive. And so this guy changes Jacob's name. Again, hugely important detail that is normally missed on us because you just don't go around doing that. It's not like a nickname. It's not like he's saying, like, from now on, you are Seabass. You know, like, it's not that. Like, it's not that. It's not a nickname. This is, I am changing your name. Because, and this is important because he's talking about a change in character. Up to this point, Jacob was a deceiver. That was how he made life work for him. He constantly schemed. He told half-truths. He said, well, I'm working to make your flocks better, which was kind of true, but not really. Like, he's always making life work for him, but he was about to return to the land that he was promised, return to be the man that God had made him to be, and that is just not going to cut it anymore. He can't be that guy anymore. Which is to say, he can't keep living in this half-light, this half-Israel world, this half-in, half-out. Am I or am I not? Do you see what this story is about? Do you see what this encounter is about? Jacob was stuck with his own methods of dealing with life, of being in life, of living his life. And here's the important thing. It was working. I think we have this, especially in the church, we have this image in our heads that if you do ungodly things, bad things will happen to you, right? Well, like, if no one's going to actually get ahead by being sneaky. Cheaters never prosper, right? Right? Have you, yeah, God bless you. Have you heard of Wall Street? Like, of course they do. Of course they do. There are entire chapters of the Bible that are raging against this. Psalm 73 is a good one, okay? It was working, at least for the most part. Jacob had become rich. He had a bunch of babies. He also had a bunch of broken relationships in his wake. But what he wanted, the wealth and the lineage, he got. It was working. It was a mixed bag. But he got the wealth, he got the affection, he got the power. He wasn't lacking in those things, right? But the problem was he was living halfway at best with God. And here's the crazy thing. When Jacob asked for a blessing, he got a disability. That's what he got. He asked for a blessing and he got a disability. He was strong, right? And anyone will tell you, if you've ever lifted weights before at any sense, you know that the power in your body comes from right here, right? High school football players, come on, like what do? You got to power with the hips, right? You got to keep moving the feet. You got to work with those hips. That's the way, that's where your strength comes from. And God said, not anymore. Not anymore. God disables him. So let me ask you something. Would you see that as a blessing? I mean, be honest. You ask for a blessing, and the blessing God gives you is to help you not trust in you anymore. I'll be honest, I probably wouldn't see that as a blessing, at least not initially. But it was a blessing. It was a blessing because the biggest enemy of change in Jacob's life was Jacob. He could not stop trusting in himself. He reverted too often to relying on his ability to manipulate the world, and he did so because he was dang good at it. Now, let's get to the story's point. Here's the problem with this passage as we approach it. We have been taught for a very long time now that if you love someone, you don't seek their change, right? Our culture does not think that seeking change in another person is loving. We think, we have been inundated with the message that each person is completely qualified individually to decide what they are to be, and there is nothing any of us can or should do against that, right? We are to be radically affirming, right? I mean, you've heard this. Some of us think this, right? You felt this. Right? If someone decides to leave their family behind and start over, we're supposed to believe that, they know best how they're supposed to be happy. If someone, no matter how young these days, decides that their biology does not determine their reality, we are simply to affirm and to celebrate. But the problem is we know that this makes no sense, right? We know this makes no sense. You and I both know people that believe they will be better off by making choices that everyone except them knows will actually cause harm. But they are convinced. We know this. You know this. But many of us have carried over this cultural view into our view of God. If God really loved me, what he would do is leave me alone and let me do what I want. Right? Because parents, that's exactly what you do with your kids, right? That's what love is, right? You leave them be and let them do whatever they want, right? Covenant family, please don't do that with the kids in this room. I'm just going to say, they're going to be hanging off the rafters and somebody's going to get hurt, right? Listen, look at me. You may be really tired of high gas prices. I know I am. But you don't get to decide what your car can run on, do you? Like, you don't get to decide one day, you know what? I know what's best for my car. Olive oil. And that's way cheaper. I don't know, it actually is. I can't do the math. Somebody will figure that out. Water, how about that? Water, that's cheaper. I know it's cheaper. Water, and that'll work better. Like, you don't get to decide that. I mean, now, you can decide whether you put that in your gas tank, but it ain't gonna work, right? It's just gonna hurt everything. It's gonna destroy it. The person who decides how the car is supposed to work is the one who designed the car to work, right? Like I said, you are free to put whatever you want in your gas tank, But it would be stupid of me to sit back and applaud you for putting olive oil in your gas tank. Aren't you so, go you. Way to stick it to the oil industry. It's not a good thing. Your car's going to break. Listen, you do know that leaving someone alone, not seeking change in their lives, is not loving, right? We know this with things that we consider self-destructive, right? You know this. You see someone abusing alcohol. You see someone who's getting ready to cheat on their spouse. Like, you know, and you go, whoa, 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 whoa. Hold on, that's bad road, man. Don't run down that. The problem is that we've limited what we think is self-destructive to like four things. Like four things. But the Bible tells us, if we're to believe that, the Bible tells us that it defines anything that doesn't line up with how God designed us as ultimately self-destructive. And so it wouldn't be loving for him to leave us pursuing that which he knows will not flourish us. That's not loving, that's hatred. I've used this analogy a bunch, but if someone is sitting in front of you starving and they have a plate in front of them filled with broken glass, just because they think that broken glass is going to fill them does not mean that you affirm it. That doesn't make it right. That's going to kill them. And they will not understand why you won't let them eat that glass. I don't think it's harmful to me. I don't care what you think. It's not harmful to me because I don't think it's harmful. It's glass. Not going to harm me. I don't know what you're talking about. Like, I don't know if we're hearing this. Look, see, the problem is, especially in the church, we tend to believe that God gives us things like the law. And he gives us the law to help us earn his favor. That is bunk. Right? You cannot, listen to me, if you've been fooled into thinking that if you just keep enough of the rules that God is going to like you more, you have been lied to. And maybe it's by you, but you have been lied to. Like, you cannot earn God's favor. God gives us his favor, and he does so in Jesus because of what Jesus has done, not because of what you have done. And I know this is hard for some of you because you're type A, and you're like, no, no, no. God gave me the law so that I can perform it. And more importantly, perform it better than that guy or this guy. More than likely this guy, right? No. That's not what it's for. The law, in one sense, is kind of like the operator's manual for humanity. And so what is it there for? Is it there for help us earn God's favor? No, it's there to show us how we're supposed to, how we're made to function. We're made to function this way. God cannot leave us alone and affirm us. He can't because he loves us. It isn't loving to leave someone to their own harm. That is hatred. And so we have to get into our minds that when God shows up as an opponent, and maybe it's an opponent in your life right now, that does not mean he does not love you. In fact, what it means more than anything is that he does. So let's talk about being opposed, because some of us this morning are in Jacob's position and we know it. I mean, sure, we're not up here like actually wrestling with some dude, but we feel it, like we're experiencing it. We know that what we've been doing, the ways we've been living, the little secret things that we've kept secret aren't in line with the gospel. Maybe it's the way we play Christian on Sunday, but on Saturday night, we're spending our time in a dark room looking at websites we shouldn't be looking at. Right? Or maybe we're hitting the bars Saturday night trying to find somebody to sleep with. Or maybe it's that we talk about how we need Jesus. We need Jesus more than anything else. But if we go a day without some glass of alcohol, we are a neurotic mess. Maybe it's more like the fact that when things go sideways, we obsess about schemes, lose sleep, can't relax until you figure out how to make life work for you. You trust your ability. Let's talk about trusting God, but man, it really comes down to it. It's how good can I come up with a plan? Here's the thing. You know that's not in line with the gospel. You know it. I don't have to tell you that. You know it. And you know it for the same reason that I know it, because you can feel it. You can make excuses, and a lot of us do. We make excuses. We're like, no. God gave me these gifts for a reason. No, I mean, this isn't really hurting anybody. We come up with excuses, but we know. We know. In fact, we can't seem to engage in spiritual things without this intense sense of confrontation. That's God. That's what he's doing. And he's getting your attention with it. Listen to me. The biggest enemy of change in your life is you. If God is wrestling with you right now, listen to me. I know that if you're experiencing a wrestling with God right now, your fear is that he is wrestling with you to destroy you. I know you wouldn't say it like that. You'd be like, no. Look, I know God's not going to destroy me. But if you were to give up that thing, your precious, my precious, that thing you're holding on to, what do you think's going to happen? Because my guess is many of us think, I can't do life without that. He can ask anything. Don't ask for that. You do think he's going to destroy you. I mean, not like, psst, but like, he's going to take that precious thing. When he disables Jacob, it isn't to destroy him, it's to help him be dependent. And right now, some of you are all thinking like, but if I give up on this other thing, if I give up on this thing, how do I know I'm going to be okay? That is a great question. See, here's the thing about these ways that we use to deal with life. They've worked. Right? Like they've worked. Not perfectly. Yeah, it's hurt some people. It's hurt me. But they've worked. It's better the method we know than the one that we don't. But listen, here's where the gospel comes into play. If the creator God of the universe that you've betrayed was willing to become human, suffer, and die to reconcile you to himself before you are even willing to acknowledge who he was, if he was willing to love you when you were in rebellion, I guarantee you, I can tell you on the authority of the Word of God, I can just tell you from life experience, he is not trying to destroy you. He was willing to do all that, and now he's kind of like, well, that didn't work. Let's kill him. Like, no, that's not the way that is all the proof you need that he is committed to your flourishing. This wrestling is not to harm you. It's not to hurt you, and it is not to make you pay for what you've done. Jesus did that. You don't have to pay for that. It is because he is desperately committed to you and desperately committed to your flourishing. But there's another aspect of this I need to hit on. Listen, I know I'm going a little long. Stick with me. God cannot be mocked. I don't go in this direction often. God cannot be mocked. You see, what Jacob got right was that at the end of the day, when he figured out who was wrestling with him, he said, I am not going to let go of you. No, I won't do it. I'm not going to do it. When he realized that it was God that he was wrestling with, he clung to him knowing that God is who he needs more than his schemes. But there's another possibility. You could just let go. Don't check out on me. Listen. I'm your pastor. Well, most of you. I'm at least the pastor you're listening to. And I'm telling you this. You cannot play both sides. Do you want to walk with Jesus or not? Do you want to follow Jesus or do you want to follow your feelings? Do you want to trust in him alone or do you want to trust in your ability to manipulate situations? Do you want to believe that he's accepted you unconditionally and loves you passionately? Or do you want to just keep going to those websites that make you feel that way? I mean, you say you want change. Do you? Do you really? Or is that just the thing you're supposed to say? Is that just the thing you're supposed to say? Listen, I want change for you, but more than that, I want you to be honest and stop playing the game. Listen, if you want change, that doesn't mean you won't need help. Maybe you do. Maybe it's time to let somebody know. Let your spouse know if you're married. Maybe it's let your small group know. Let an elder know. Let somebody know. Just tell somebody. And it doesn't have to be like, I'm going to share my deepest shame with you. I mean, maybe it is, but maybe it's something that you just like, I don't know. You're just like, I just can't stop doing this. There can be help. But the question is, and yeah, hear it, receive this question. What do you want? What do you want? Not what should you do? What do you want? And maybe the best you can go for this morning is I want to change. If that's the case, awesome. That's awesome. Take that to Jesus. He will answer that prayer. I want to change. Can you help me? Yes. That is the first step to telling him you will not let go until he blesses you. But if you are struggling this morning and you're like, there's something, you're Jacob, you're living in two worlds, you're living in two different eras, two day and night, Israel not, like, am I a follower of Jesus or am I not? If you're struggling this morning, can I tell you, that is because God is committed to you. You think if God weren't committed to you, you'd be struggling? You think he'd be wrestling? He'd be like, nah, man, I don't got time for that. He has come to you to wrestle, to work on you, so that you will trust in him alone. That doesn't mean it's easy. It just means it's possible. It means it's possible because God is wrestling with you, and the biggest enemy of change in your life is you. Would you pray with me? Lord, right now, I just want you, more than anything else, to answer the arguments that are going on internally right now. Because there's a couple arguments. One is, that's easy for that guy up there to say, which makes me laugh. Shows you they don't know me. Others is, this isn't possible for me. Others is, that's not true, God really doesn't love me. I want you to answer those arguments, Jesus. I want you to answer those. But more than anything else, Lord, I pray you would make it very clear on what it is that we want. Help us. And more than anything else, Lord, drag us to you so that we will want you and you alone. And let everything else that you have given, all the good gifts, all the abilities, the gifts that you've given us in many, like outside of us and inside of us, they could all line up under that one thing, that chief love. May it be, Lord, because if you don't do it, we have no hope. And so we seek you on this and ask for it. In Jesus' name, amen.